I don't know what to make of this. Now I've always been aware of the black-eyed children just as cryptids or demons whatever. I work 7/11ths overnights and the other night 4/14ths I was doing my shift change at 2:47 a.m. As I was finishing my door chime went off causing me to look up. The door was wide open and creeping shut. But beyond the door on the other side of my gas pumps next to my air pump I saw two kids, a boy and a girl. The boy had on normal clothes with like a black t-shirt and the girl had on a white top half dress with the bottom being black. I noticed this and got confused. It's now 2:50. So finished counting the money and they were still there, hadn't moved. Now I already felt like something was off. I was experiencing a bunch of anxiety and my arm hairs were charged with static. I walk out front and I said, "Hey guys, what are you doing out here alone?" I received no responses, which literally like sent me with fear so bad. Then the girl, clearly a year or two older, steps of the curb and she extended her hand. Her brother took it and hopped of the curb like playfully. "So again, come inside where it's warm." When I said that, my whole body like shut down and I was literally from like I turned a corner to a bear. I'd never felt more fear in my entire life. I pulled myself literally by the door handle, feeling like a bag of rocks inside. The second I was inside, the fear subsided. I ran behind my counter so fucking fast. I sat there and watched them cross over to the next curb, 305, towards the building, but never saw them emerge again. I have to go back to work tonight, been off since then, and I'm absolutely terrified. I invited them in, so damn it, am I in trouble? My cat's been hissing at nothing when I'm home alone. I think they didn't come in or towards the front of my store because it's got so much lighting. I think the heavy lighting stopped that encounter. I also has my boss roll back the cameras and they saw nothing. She thinks I'm crazy, so does everyone else. Except maybe people who have experienced this. I know people have. I'm worried about work for some reason. It's like I know I'm going to my death. It's eating at my chest. My grandmother lived with my parents and I for nearly my entire life. She passed away in her connected basement apartment in 2020. She raised me, so losing her has been very hard. We have noticed some odd things happening in the basement. My sister went down there once and one of her old clown figurines randomly fell off of a shelf. One time I was sitting down there and all of the ornaments on the Christmas tree just started shaking. I tried speaking to a photo of her on the wall once as a sort of therapy, and the picture randomly became illuminated in a way. The time that sticks with me the most was on New Year's Eve 2020. I couldn't go anywhere cause pandemic, so I stayed up late playing video games. I had to work very early in the morning, but I kept playing. I thought to myself that I should go to bed soon, but oh well. Just after that thought came into my head, my game shut off and I got an error message that I've never gotten before and haven't gotten since then. I immediately went to bed. She is still parenting me from beyond the grave. Somehow. I, 27F, live in the UK and have been a qualified nurse since 2018. I specialise in stroke and stroke rehabilitation, but also work in a private nursing home from time to time to earn some extra money. About 6 months ago a new resident moved into the home, we can call her Jenny, for palliative care for her terminal bowel cancer. Whilst with us, Jenny found out that not only had her bowel cancer spread to her liver and lungs, but she also had brain metastasis and only had a few months left to live. After about 2 months with us, she started really freaking out when we would help her back to her room in the evening and get her comfortable for the night. She used to shout at us to be careful of the children or don't fall in the river. When asked what she was talking about, she explained to us she could see a river flowing through her room and lots of children playing in it. She wasn't necessarily scared of the children, she just didn't want us to stand on them and hurt them. The doctors and nurses all believed that she was hallucinating due to the brain metastases and the amount of opioid medication she was on, and we all made sure we didn't stand where she was pointing to, so we didn't stand on the children she could see. A couple of months ago Jenny passed away peacefully and I hadn't thought about the children or the river since. 2 weeks ago, a new resident moved into Jenny's old room, we will call her Sarah. I would like to point out that Sarah didn't live here when Jenny was here, they have never met and nobody would ever have mentioned Jenny to Sarah. Sarah's first week with us passed and she was settling in well until the other night when we tried to take her back to her room for the night and she refused. She said she was not ever going back into that room because she couldn't sleep due to all the noise and she didn't like how close they all got. We asked her what she meant as the home is very quiet at night and she said, "Jenny, I froze." I again asked her what she meant and she said, "Jenny and the children make so much noise when they're playing and it keeps me up all night." I was in absolute shock and have had trouble going in that room since. I've always been a skeptic, but I can't see any other logical explanation for this. I have asked other staff and nobody has mentioned Jenny or the children in the river to Sarah. Somebody please tell me there's another explanation for this. Whenever I was much younger, I would always see the same man at night at the same place. I live in a rather small town, we know almost everyone here. So seeing a new face was different, but the thing was he didn't have an exact face. I started to call him Mr. Tux. He was rather lanky, around 6 feet 7 inches I believe. He was wearing like a wedding tux, and a top hat. He always stood under the same light post every night. One night he just stopped appearing there. And I never saw him again. First, I need to give out a trigger warning. This was an intense experience in my life, so if you are sensitive, you might want to pass on reading this. Second, I apologize for the length. For context, I have to provide some backstory. When I was 5 years old, my parents were still together. Both of my parents are crazy. My mom has narcissistic personality disorder, and my dad was friends with Charles Manson. In those first years, I've been in the middle of a gunfight between my parents and some people they had beef with. I watched my dad beat up a cop. I still have no idea how he got away with it. Etc. etc. None of that is too relevant, but I needed to establish that madness of my father in order to convey the events that take place. My parents raised me to be Christian. The Bible was read to me before bedtime at night and I went to a Christian school in kindergarten. My mom and dad split up and I moved out of my apartment with my parents to a new apartment with my mom. My dad still saw me more than my mom, but apparently this didn't satisfy him. So he calls me up and tells me that he's going to take me away from my mom. That God wanted me to be with him and really used the religious angle to manipulate me into going with him. A lot of bad things happened and I don't know how much I can, or should share. My father took me to his apartment the night that we were supposed to leave. It was nearly empty because he had sold everything off for our trip. I have very little memory of what happens next. My father was telling me that my mother hated me and was going to kill me, then would press record on a tape player to record me crying and saying how much I hate my mom. This disturbed me to the point that I was vomiting before he stopped. My mom has the tape and I never listened to it, but it was pretty crazy from what she said, and that he had threatened to kill me if she came after us. I was told to wait out in the car and I went outside, crying, and the weird thing is that the memory completely left me in the car. I still to this day can't really remember it, but I know that it happened. That night my father robbed his gas station, called the cops, and told them that a black person had robbed him. Except he wasn't using that term and there was nobody but him in the gas station. I watched him put the money in the trunk of the car. With that we were off and running. The next morning we began our bus journey across the states. We were on the run for months. I was wearing a thin baseball jacket and we were moving around between Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana during the dead of winter. I caught pneumonia and was very sick. It got to the point that I had no appetite and couldn't eat. My mom had hired a private investigator and my dad was getting word from his family in Indiana that my mom was on his trail. I remember talking to my mom on the phone from a friend of my father's house in Indiana. It was strange because I was so emotionally confused and she was obviously distraught. Not long after this my father and I were in a hotel room. A news story comes on about a father who kidnapped his son who was my age and the mom was closing in on them. That father burned his kid alive and the child survived with third-degree burns all over his body. My father saw this as a sign and decided that he knew what he had to do. My father told me that night before bed that he needed to send me to heaven to be with God and that it was the only way to keep me safe from my mother. I pleaded with him not to do that, but he told me to go to sleep. The next morning we went to a store and bought kerosene and sleeping pills. I can still remember that morning so well. The way that the sunlight shone through the glass doors on the kerosene can. My father tried to make it a good last day for me. I remember him buying me ice cream, but I was too sick to eat any ice cream, and emotionally I was a mess knowing that I was about to die soon. That night my father gave me sleeping pills and told me that when I woke up that I was going to be in heaven with God and the angels. I was crying and begging him not to do it. He had tears in his eyes and he left the room after telling me that he loved me. I cried myself to sleep, and that's when I had my experience. Sorry for the long setup, but it's relevant. The next thing that I remember was being in what I can only describe as like a fog. I have no body, but I'm somehow vaguely familiar with my form. There are people in front of, and behind me in a line. They have no body either, and none of them are talking. I'm trying to ask them to help me find my mom, and I can't really leave the line. Another person comes walking along the line. He has a form, but I can't really describe it. He's sort of invisible like everyone else. Sorry if this makes no sense. I still can't properly make sense of it all these years later. He bends down to talk to me. He tells me that his name is Michael and that I am not supposed to be here. He then tells me that we need to go and talk to Peter. I realized that Michael was an angel. He took me out of the line and held my formless hand, yet I know it makes no sense, as we walk forward and there was Peter in front of the gates of heaven. Peter had a book and Michael and Peter talked for a few seconds and Peter told me to come over to him. He opened up the book, read about my life in the book, and told me that I had a choice. Peter told me that if I wanted to stay, that I would be admitted into heaven. He also said that I could go back, but if I did, that it was very unlikely that I would make it back to heaven. I had this vague sensation of how my life would turn out to be bad, but I was also scared of dying and I wanted to get back to my mom. I told Peter that I wanted to go back to be with my mom. The next thing that I remember is waking up, my father is sobbing over my bed. I asked him why I wasn't in heaven, and he told me that he didn't have the heart to do it. If that's not strange enough, I didn't have the memory of Peter and Michael. It was gone in the morning. It was absent from my life until around the age of 23 I started to remember it. When I gave it some thought, it all came flooding back to me. The worst part is, that I wish I had stayed in heaven when Peter gave me the chance. What he said to me appears to be exactly what's going on with my life. It haunts me and fills me with regret. But that's my own personal shit. That's it for my paranormal experience. My father took me back to my mom after that. My mom didn't have him arrested because, before all of this happened, I loved my father more than my mom, and she knew that him being in jail would just pile on even more trauma than I was already experiencing. My father was allowed supervised visits at our house after a few years. At around the age of 10 he just stopped coming by. My mom couldn't contact him and she went to the bowling alley where his new girlfriend worked. His car was parked out back and full of stuff like he was living in it, and his GF was pregnant. I never officially saw my father again. Fast forward to the 8th grade. I had moved a few times between 10 and 14 and was in the same city where my father was last seen. One day I see him sitting in his car parked at my bus stop. He's just sitting there watching me and I'm freaked out. I get on the bus and he follows the bus for a few blocks. I told my mom about it, and she tried to track him down again to tell him to back off. She never found him, and he would drive by our house and my school a few times a week for another week or two, and then he was gone for good. Anyways, that's my story. Sorry for the long setup. I don't think that my story would really be worth telling without it. It was a short paranormal experience, but the circumstances surrounding it are pretty extraordinary.
Looking for something to meet your photonic need? Redlight has laser diodes, remote-controlled rooms with lasers mounted on them, USB chargeable laser pens, rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, high-powered lasers that can ignite matches, cat toys. Hell, if you got enough money, they'd probably sell you a Jewish space laser. Welcome to Radlight. Point with precision, present with confidence. Visit us at radlight.dev. Tell them the Atomic Shaman Sweat Lodge sent you.
Mosey on down to the Atomic Shaman Trading Post. We have t-shirts, decals, refrigerator magnets and other swag for sale. What better way to show your support for the show? Our merch can only be found on t.pub/link/Atomic Shaman Trading Post. Like, share and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to ring the notification bell. You can follow us on Twitter at Motel and RV Park. Catch the live streams on Rumble. Listen to text-to-speech stories on Atomic Shaman TTS on YouTube.